Boko Haram unleashes more terror during a strike in Cameroon in a brazen cross-border kidnapping. As the world mulls ways to combat terror, Muslim anger grows. And Oprah Winfrey and the Stars of Selma march in Alabama to honor Martin Luther King Jr. Africa 54 starts right now.
Hello and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. Tonight, we begin in Cameroon, where officials say Boko Haram militants abducted at least 60 people, including children, Sunday in a cross-border raid from Nigeria. Several people who tried to stop the militants were killed, and about 80 homes were burned to the ground, according to the officials. There was also a suicide bombing early Sunday at a bus station in the northern Nigerian city of Patiskum that killed 4 people and wounded at least 25 others. There was no immediate claim of responsibility, but suspicion fell on Boko Haram. The 2 incidents came a day after Chad sent thousands of troops into Cameroon to help fight the terrorist group. In Yemen, how the rebels and government forces have clashed Monday in the capital near the palace of President Abed Rabo Mansour Hadi. Witnesses say the fighting in Sana'a involved heavy gunfire and explosions that sent panicked civilians fleeing from the area. Officials say later the 2 sides agreed to a ceasefire, but gunfire continued in the city. The violence comes days after Houthis kidnapped President Hadi's chief of staff to disrupt a meeting about crafting a new constitution. Shia rebels have been in control of Sana'a since September, when they swept into the city and later signed a deal calling for a new government. Violence in Sana'a and across Yemen has persisted as the rebels, along with other groups, including Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, battle for power in a country that has been in turmoil since the ouster of its longtime leader Ali Abdullah Saleh 3 years ago. Well, U.S. President Barack Obama is preparing to deliver his annual State of the Union address at a time of heightened vigilance in Washington and beyond, following terrorist attacks in France. VOA's Michael Bowman has our report.
Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and distinct honor of presenting to you the President of the United States.
The ceremonial pageantry of Tuesday's presidential speech before a joint session of Congress comes against a backdrop of ramped-up security on both sides of the Atlantic. In recent days, a shootout in Belgium, police raids in Germany, arrests in Greece, and stepped-up security across Europe, all following the attack on French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo.
It's not the same as in the days of 9/11.
Security efforts must adapt to an evolving threat, according to Rob Wainwright, who heads the European Union law enforcement agency, Europol.
We are seeing a very determined response by national governments, by national police authorities, and at institutions like Europol, urgently reviewing our ways now that we can better support counter-terrorist services everywhere, in the better exchange of intelligence, for example, in the tracking of terrorist financing and illicit firearms, and in particular in monitoring as well terrorist activities online.
For President Obama, who hopes to work with a new Republican-controlled Congress on an agenda that includes domestic priorities, fast-paced international developments are forcing greater attention to security matters at home and abroad.
This phenomenon of violent extremism, the ideology, the networks, the capacity to recruit young people. This has metastasized, and it is widespread, and it has penetrated communities around the world. This is a problem that causes great heartache and tragedy and destruction, but it is one that ultimately we're going to defeat.
With terrorist sleeper cells believed to exist in numerous countries and the possibility of the Charlie Hebdo incident rallying extremists across the globe, the Obama administration and other governments are asking not whether another attack will be attempted, but when and where. Michael Bowman, VOA News, Washington.
The president of Niger says at least 10 people have been killed in 2 days of violent protests over the cartoon depiction of Prophet Muhammad on the cover of the latest issue of the French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo. President Mahamoud Issoufou says 5 people were killed Saturday in a church fire and violent clashes in the capital near May. At least 5 others were killed a day earlier in the southern town of Zinder. The deadly protests in the former French colony Friday included an attack on a French cultural center. The French embassy warned its citizens Saturday not to go into the streets. European Union foreign ministers met in Brussels Monday in the aftermath of deadly attacks in France and anti-terror raids in Belgium. The ministers discussed a range of options as the bloc prepares for a special summit next month dedicated to fighting terrorism. Much of Europe remains tense and on high alert as Belgian authorities say the alleged mastermind in last week's foiled terror attack remains at large. Belgian media have named the wanted mastermind of the plot as Abdelhamid Aboud. The 27-year-old Belgian of Moroccan descent is suspected of leading an Islamic extremist cell in the eastern town of Verviers. Authorities say the cell was about to launch a major terrorist attack on police targets before officers raided the hideout Thursday, killing 2 in a fierce gun battle. Belgium's justice minister says the suspect was not among 4 people arrested in Greece where he was believed to have fled. Belgian prosecutors still plan to ask Greece to extradite one of those arrested in connection with the thwarted terror attack. Well, a Muslim man from Mali is being awarded French citizenship after he helped to save lives of Jewish shoppers during the recent terrorist attack on a kosher supermarket in Paris. Lazana Pathley was working as a shop attendant at the supermarket when a man took several customers hostage. Pathley hid other customers in a basement freezer while he escaped to get help. The suspect and 4 hostages were killed in the standoff. France's Interior Ministry says it has fast-tracked Pathley's request for citizenship because of his acts of bravery. He is expected to receive his citizenship during a ceremony on Tuesday. Well, U.S. President Barack Obama and British Prime Minister David Cameron discussed cooperation against the growing terrorist threat by radicalized Islamists during a meeting in Washington Friday. While police in several European countries conducted raids on suspected terrorist cells, groups of Muslims in a number of countries held rallies protesting against what they see as insults and assaults against Islam. VOA's Latza Hoke tells us more.
European countries have boosted security in the wake of Paris terrorist attacks. The head of the European Union police agency Europol said international cooperation is essential as extremists move across borders and use increasingly sophisticated methods. He said a great number of European Muslims have become radicalized and armed.
We're also concerned about the way in which terrorist networks are using the internet in a much more sophisticated way, as a recruitment tool, as a propaganda tool, as we have seen with IS in Syria. But we're particularly concerned about the way in which the internet, of course, can be used for effective, secure communications outside perhaps the reach of law enforcement.
In Washington Friday, President Obama and Britain's Prime Minister David Cameron agreed to expand cooperation on fighting terrorism.
We both recognize that intelligence and military force alone is not going to solve this problem, so we're also going to keep working together on strategies to counter violent extremism that radicalizes, recruits, and mobilizes people, especially young people, to engage in terrorism. And local communities, families, neighbors, faith leaders have a vital role to play in that effort.
Ahead of the meeting, Prime Minister Cameron told the Associated Press he would seek cooperation with large technology firms to allow governments access to highly suspicious encrypted communications.
There is a broad agreement that we need to have the powers to, in extremis, intercept communications between terrorists. That is what America does today. It is what Britain does today. We share the intelligence and information between us, and this has saved countless lives, not just in Britain and America, but in other countries as well.
Meanwhile, in Ghana, President John Mahama called on African nations to work together to rid the continent permanently of the threat of terror.
I am, through the President of ECOWAS, requesting a special session at the upcoming 24th African Union Summit in order to discuss and plan not as separate sub-regions but as one united continent, the way forward in our collective fight against terrorism.
The week after the attacks on the French magazine Charlie Hebdo, the satirical weekly published a new issue with the cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad on its cover, sparking several protests around the world, some of which turned violent. Zlarica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
Well, on a positive note here, Mali has declared itself free of the deadly Ebola virus. Health Minister Osman Kone made the announcement after the 42 period, the World Health Organization's time frame for declaring the end of an epidemic. A new WHO report says Mali moved quickly to contain an outbreak when the first case was reported in October in a 2-year-old girl from Guinea. It says in all, 6 people in Mali died from the disease. The WHO reported last week that the Ebola outbreak in 3 other West African countries, Guinea, Liberia and Sierra Leone, is starting to wane. But the United Nations Health Agency warns that the epidemic is still not over and there are areas where the virus is spreading. Well, Somalia's Prime Minister has dissolved his 60-man cabinet on the day it was to face a confidence vote in the federal parliament. Now, the Prime Minister has 14 days to propose a new cabinet and to seek a confidence vote in the divided parliament. Abdulaziz Bilo reports on the latest political developments in Somalia.
Somalia parliament members voiced strong opposition to the cabinet proposed by Somali Prime Minister Omar Abdirashid Ali Sharmake, and he withdrew his list of 60 appointees just hours before a confidence vote in the country's top lawmaking body. The Prime Minister also called for Parliament to grant him a 14-day extension to form an administration. Through his spokesman, Mr. Sharmake thanked the 275-member Parliament for heeding his request.
The Prime Minister has given enough thoughts to the issues raised by Somali lawmakers, and after careful consideration, he will announce a competent government that will have both the support of the Somali Parliament and the Somali public.
Political analyst Abukar Al-Badri says Mr. Sharmake is likely to face many challenges from the Somali Parliament before his cabinet list is endorsed.
The Prime Minister is facing a daunting task. He is faced with dealing with a divided parliament and strong opposition of his cabinet appointees by several clans. MPs and clan elders have also voiced concern over the recent appointments, and this might derail the Prime Minister from delivering on his duties.
Among the problems that lawmakers had with Mr. Sharmake's list was the inclusion of former ministers and senior officials previously accused of incompetency. Experts say Parliament's decision to reject the appointees indicates the maturity of Somalia's democratic institutions.
The Parliament in this case has shown its credibility by turning down the cabinet appointees even before it was brought to Parliament. This shows that if the administration does not cooperate with the Parliament, endorsing the future government lists might prove more complicated in the future.
The East African nation has taken steps towards order after years of lawlessness, but a political crisis developed late last year when President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud forced the resignation of the then Prime Minister Abdiweli Sheikh Ahmed. The political instability is threatening the country's plan for elections in 2016. The international community remains committed to stabilizing Somalia, but United Nations and US officials have demanded the country's leaders halt their chronic infighting for the sake of Somalia's future. Abdulaziz Bilon for VOA News, Mogadishu.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, what would Martin Luther King Jr. say about Ferguson? Well, stay with us.
Dr. Martin Luther King was the essential element in the transformation of the country.
He tried to help African Americans and It was something that changed our world.
It was something that I grew up knowing.
The words and leadership of Dr. King inspired me.
We were fortunate to have one just when we needed him.
Well, the third Monday in January is a federal holiday in the United States celebrating the birthday of civil rights activist and Nobel Peace Laureate Martin Luther King Jr. This year, the holiday has special meaning for many after the events of recent months in Ferguson, Missouri and New York City. VOA's Joy Wagner has more.
If he were alive today, what would Martin Luther King say about the deaths of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and Eric Garner in New York City, both unarmed and killed in confrontations with police, and about the anger and demonstrations that have followed?
Because I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
King's famous I Have a Dream speech, delivered during the 1963 March on Washington, was an iconic event in the struggle to end racial segregation and establish equal rights for all citizens of the United States. Last month, there was another March on Washington. Tens of thousands of demonstrators in the nation's capital called for justice in the deaths of Michael Brown and Eric Garner. This demonstration was peaceful. And Martin Luther King's niece, Alveda King, whose father, A.D. King, was also a civil rights activist, suggested the violent protests in Ferguson, when a grand jury did not indict the police officer involved in Brown's death, was not the right approach.
Back up.
How y'all doing, officer?
She called the Ferguson protest slogan, "No justice, no peace," aggressive, and said only peaceful protests can lead to any positive results, recalling the day in 1963 that her own home was bombed.
I remember my daddy standing on a car, AD, and the people wanted to do just what they did in Ferguson. The people were trying to turn over a police car, they wanted to throw rocks, and they were just trying to be very violent. And I remember Daddy standing on a car. There's a photograph of AD standing on a car with a megaphone with a young man. And he says, "Don't riot. Don't be violent. My family and I are okay. Please go home and pray."
Some critics of the protests suggest the demonstrations have created animosity towards police and may have led to the killing of 2 New York City police officers, Rafael Ramos and Wenzing Liu. But one of the positive things to emerge is a peaceful discussion about racial discrimination that's taking place in social media.
So when I see the hashtag Black Lives Matter, I believe black lives from conception in the womb until natural death, the sick, the elderly, the young, the old, the educated, those who need things in communities, all black lives and all human lives matter.
In honor of this holiday, parades are organized in many cities and hymns are sung in churches across the country. Americans, including the president and his family, take part in community projects aimed to bring Americans together. Alveda King says that this was her uncle's dream, to see this nation peaceful and united.
I'm going to let it shine, oh, this little light of mine. I'm going to let it shine, this little light of mine. I'm going to let it shine.
Joy Wagner for Anusha Vetzian, VOA News, Washington.
If your light won't shine.
Well, the use of deadly force by law enforcement officers across the United States in recent months has focused new attention on the procedures available to citizens to file concerns and complaints against the police. A VOA special series, To Protect and to Serve, is an in-depth look at policing in the United States. Ken Faribault reports.
Just got dispatched to an alarm run at a residence.
Justin Henry is one of about 1,500 police officers patrolling zones in and around the city of Indianapolis, where about 1 million people either live or work. Henry's job puts him in contact with some of these citizens every day. For a policeman, each encounter is different, often uncertain and sometimes dangerous. Police Chief Richard "Rick" Height says his officers work to deal with that uncertainty by being proactive about knowing the people they police.
and meet some of the residents before an issue occurs, so that you're no stranger when something happens in the community and you show up. Your job is to go out there and be a problem solver.
But when a citizen has a complaint with an Indianapolis police officer, Chief Height will know about it.
Police complaints, how may I help you?
Thanks to the Citizens Police Complaint Office.
We offer that citizen an avenue to say your voice is valuable and you do have a voice in this process, that the police can't come in and treat people however they want.
Laura White heads the office, whose complaint board is made up of 9 appointed civilians. It also includes 3 law enforcement officers, but they don't vote on cases under review.
We're an independent agency of the police department. We are there as an avenue for the citizens of Indianapolis to articulate complaints that they may have had during a law enforcement engagement with a police officer.
The complaint process in Indianapolis was established in 1989 by city ordinance to ensure independent accountability.
They review the case, the complaint, the investigation, and then they render a decision on the findings.
But the results of a 2012 audit conducted by a consulting firm contracted by the city found that there were serious restrictions on how the complaints were filed. Laura White, who took over the office after the audit, says she believes recent figures for 2014 indicate the process is working.
We had 110 total officers that had complaints filed against them, and out of that we had 45 disciplines that came out of that. So almost half resulted in a discipline.
When you add the element of civilians into the process, they're able to look at it with an outsider's perspective and make sure that the investigation is done fairly and consistently over time.
Cameron McElhenney is a former member of the Indianapolis Citizens Complaint Board and now serves as the Director of Training for the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, or NACOL.
I think what Ferguson and other national cases have done for oversight is made not just law enforcement agencies, but city leaders and members of the community understand is that this isn't something that should be done after something has happened. That maybe it's time to start doing oversight ahead of time so that bad things don't happen in communities.
Though the complaint and review process can be intrusive and disruptive for the officer or department involved, Chief Height welcomes the scrutiny.
We have to have checks and balances. As we often talk about, it's important to recognize there our quality compliance.
Let me have the channel a minute, please. I'm going to deploy the surge from Madison.
A 2013 study by California State University Fullerton shows that more than 100 police departments, many in large cities, have civilian oversight boards. While New York City has such oversight, the Ferguson, Missouri City Council only voted last September to set up a civilian review board. Kane Fairbaugh, VOA News, Indianapolis, Indiana.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, how opera and the stars of Selma commemorated Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. We'll be right back.
The day we've been waiting. Remember the widows.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. Star power in Selma to honor Martin Luther King Jr. Oprah Winfrey marched in Selma, Alabama, with Selma director Ava DuVernay, actor David Oyelowo, who portrayed King in the movie, and the rapper Common. Winfrey was a producer in the film and had an acting role like Common. They marched to Edmund Peters Bridge, where civil rights protesters were beaten and tear-gassed in 1965. They were joined by hundreds of other marchers. Common and John Legend performed their Oscar-nominated song Glory from the film as marchers crossed the top of the bridge. Now, February will be a busy month for John Legend. He'll be attending the Oscars later in the month, and on February 1st, he'll be performing at the Super Bowl. The National Football League announced that John Legend will perform America the Beautiful before the Super Bowl at the University of Phoenix Stadium in Glendale, Arizona. Frozen star Idina Menzel will sing the national anthem before the big game kicks off. Menzel had a top-notch year as well, thanks to the success of Frozen and her worldwide hit Let It Go. And that is what is trending today. Well, it's time now for Monday Sports Report. For the latest news and notes, here's Sunny Young with the sunny side of sports. Sunny.
Hi, Vincent, and sporty greetings once again to our Africa 54 viewers. The 30th Africa Cup of Nations football tournament officially kicked off over the weekend in Equatorial Guinea. Fans cheered and celebrated outside the Estadio de Bata, where the first two matches were played. This is shaping up as one of the most competitive Nations Cup tournaments in recent years, and the first four games reflect that. 3 of them ended in draws, while Gabon was the only team to get a victory. The Gabonese defeated Burkina Faso 2-0. Equatorial Guinea had only 9 weeks to prepare for hosting the event after Morocco dropped out over Ebola fears. The Nations Cup will culminate February 8th with the final in Bata. Now let's take a look at the official mascot for the 2015 Nations Cup tournament. His name is Chuku Chuku, and my sources tell me he's a squirrel. Nations Cup officials say they're nutty for this sporty squirrel. As you can see, Chuku Chuku has very long hair, and that hair is colored red, green, blue, and white, the same colors as Equatorial Guinea's national flag. Chuku Chuku also has his left foot on the official Adidas Nations Cup football, which is called Marhaba, which means welcome. Welcome to Africa 54, Chuku Chuku. I'm VOA's Sunny Young, and that's the sunny side of sports. Vincent?
Well, thanks a lot, Sunny, and that's our show for today. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.
On Assignment really is designed to be your backstage pass to VOA reporting all around the world.
But what VOA On Assignment does is to put you in the driver's seat with that reporter, so you would see things as a reporter sees it.
We allow our reporters to tell us the details that they weren't able to include in their stories.
VOA Economics Editor Jim Randall, thanks so much. VOA On Assignment puts a human face to the stories of our correspondents.
That's really what it's all about.
I'm Larry London from Border Crossings, and this is VOA.
Follow us online at voanews.com.
I'm Vincent McCory from Africa 54. This is VOA. Follow us on Africa 54. Go to facebook.com/VOA Africa 54.